So in honor of Father's Day, I thought I would direct my homily primarily to the men and the fathers in the room. But that doesn't mean that the children and the wives should tune out because, tomorrow after Father's Day's passed, you can use this to, nag and harp on them. I'm also blessed that today, if I'm correct from the website, I am preaching on the live stream, which is wonderful because my father lives in PA, which means with any luck, my father figured out the YouTube link, or my mother did, and he's watching it. And he's going to hate that because my dad is a private person, but he's also going to love it because he loves seeing his son function as a priest. In fact, on my wall, I have 2 pictures from 2 points in my monastic and priestly journey of my father that I look at every day. The first is from the Mass where I made my final profession as a monk. It was snapped candidly right before the Mass began, and it shows my father wearing the brown suit he got from me as a hand-me-down probably 20 years ago. I'm larger than him. Kneeling there before the Mass, hands grasped, praying. And because I know my father, I know he was praying for me, that things would go well, that my monastic life would be fruitful. The second is from my Mass of Thanksgiving, the, quote, first Mass after my ordination. And in it is my father and mother in the front pew, just beaming with a smile, so happy, so joyous, so loving, so full of love that their son, after all the work in seminary and all the years, is now saying Mass. Faith was important to my dad. It is to this day. In fact, before I entered the Abbey, I worked for a nonprofit in Pittsburgh. It was run by 14 different communities of Catholic sisters, and it provided housing and supportive services to single-parent homeless families. As a certified teacher, it was primarily my job to get the children back up to pace once they got back into regular school. But one day, while we and my dad were going to renew my driver's license, we were in the car, which was often and still is one of my dad's favorite moments to corner me and to ask me questions that are on his mind. He looks at me and goes, "So what do you plan to do? You going to keep working for this nonprofit, or are you actually going to use your teaching degree more and try to get into a classroom? Like, what do you want to do? What do you plan? You got to make a decision." And I looked at him and I went, "Well, to be honest, thinking about going back to school." Without hesitation, he goes, "To be a priest?" I went, "Yeah." And again, without hesitation, his immediate response was, "Who pays for that? Do I pay for that?" "I'll pay for that." He insisted he would pay for it. I did not tell the Abbey that. But an immediate willingness to encourage the vocation, an immediate desire to not only keep and instill the faith in his son, but to do everything in his power to help him get to the altar. Now, my dad is not a wealthy man. He worked longwall in a deep mine for 18 years mining coal. And then he moved on to work as a factory laborer for a company called Spiltech, which is a subsidiary of Newpig. And basically what they do is they make cloth you put under machines so that if oil leaks, OSHA and the EPA doesn't fine you. But not wealthy jobs. And yet, his immediate response was, how can I help? How can I make this happen? Some of the servers have seen the chalice I use. Silver, solid, lined with gold. My own design, drawing from the sacrifices of the Old Testament. When I suggested it to my dad, I was like, well, we can go with brass. He's like, no. That's when I found out, likewise, my father had worked overtime for years, saving every penny, so that when I became ordained, I could do it right. Statistics are interesting. Our Lord reminds us today that the harvest is ready, but the laborers are few. This is true. A disturbing statistic in the United States is that 75% of Catholic religious, monks, nuns, sisters, brothers, are over the age of 70. Which means the laborers we have are on their way out, retired or retiring, dead or dying. Statistics also show that when it comes to vocations, when it comes to keeping the faith even, it's the faith of the Father, the witness of the Father in the family, and his devotion to God, which is the most clear indicator that the faith will survive in the children to the next generation. Crazy enough, a faithful father and a quasi-practicing mother is about 2 points more likely to have a son or daughter stay in the faith than two devoutly practicing parents, even. As fathers, your witness of the faith, your devotion to God, has proven to be essential to the survival of the church, to the witness of the gospel, to the practicing of the sacraments. And I get it. A lot of people, at least from my experience working at Del Barton, have a very similar prayer. Oh Lord, I think the neighbor's boy would be a great priest. He should be a priest. Problem is, the neighbor's making the same prayer. If we want a church to survive, if we want priests and religious, brothers and sisters, then we need to encourage them. We need, like my father, to be willing to say, who pays for that? I'll pay for that. We need to be willing to let our sons and daughters be the laborers to go and perform the harvest. Because otherwise, in the years to come, we might be like some parts of the world where if you want to get married with a priest or a deacon, you have to wait a year, 2 years, till one comes by. If you want to get a baptism done by a priest or a deacon, similar story. A friend of mine works as a missionary in Alaska. He has a pilot license. He flies a bushcraft plane in and out. Some of his parishioners see him once a year. As fathers, you are called always to foster the love of God in your children. The easiest way to do that is to show them. Not tell them. Not say, oh, do this, do that. But to live the witness of example. To be, like my father has been for me, a living witness of God, a living witness to prayer. Again, those images I talked about, my dad praying just candidly, taken, touches me because that is my father. I joke. When my father dies, he'll be buried with two things. The first is the stole from my first confession, as is tradition, because the tradition of the church is he gets it Because in the sacrament of reconciliation, the priest shows God's mercy and justice, things he is supposed to have learned first and foremost from the witness of his own Father. The second will be a small piece of hemlock, because all the years I went hunting with my dad, we'd often hunt under a hemlock tree. And my dad would sit there, use his fingers to count the beads, and say a rosary after rosary, counting the decades by pulling a little sprig of hemlock and setting it on a rock or a tree stand that we were using as a blind. He never told me to pray. He never said, pray the rosary. He just did it. And I learned. As fathers, we are called to be happy, to be witnesses to our families, to always be the best of witnesses, the first witness of the faith, as the order of baptism so proudly calls us. Because the harvest is ready, but the laborers are few.